Welcome to Forum 360. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. This is Leslie Unger, your host today. Today we're going to look at a topic that is a lot like the weather in Northeast Ohio. Everyone talks about it. In some ways, today's topic is like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. I know it when I see it. Mideast expert Aaron David Miller recently said while in his hometown of Cleveland, one of the challenges in the world today is that we lack great leaders. Today we are looking at leadership, what it is, and an organization in Northeast Ohio whose purpose it is to unlock and to serve as a catalyst for the leaders of today and the future. Our guest today is the president of Leadership Akron, Justin Hilton. Did you ever think about who heads an organization that is all about leadership? Justin's background is in executive administration, higher education, public relations, consulting, architecture, and business. His career has taken him from Kent State to Goodyear, and he serves on the Leadership Advisory Board of the LeBron James Family Foundation. So we welcome Justin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Of course.
So let me ask you first, what would you consider has been your greatest accomplishment in leadership in the past?
Wow, my greatest accomplishment in leadership in the past.
Which it may or may not include your daughter.
I was just about to. That's great. No, I was literally just thinking about the next generations, right? My mind immediately went to not just what I've done today or in the recent past, but what have I done to empower the next generation? So when I started doing professional speaking, and that professional speaking included a wide variety of executives to seasoned leaders to those in the nonprofit sectors, et cetera. But it was when I started to get connected to the youth is when I found that that was my greatest sort of leadership impact, was pouring into the next generation of our up and coming leaders.
So if you follow that thread, then I would follow up with, what do you hope will be your greatest leadership accomplishment?
So I think I would want my greatest leadership accomplishment to be a legacy that encourages people to love and lead out of love. I think leadership, obviously leadership is supremely important. It's probably $1 billion industry across the entire world in terms of books sold and curriculums created and all of those kinds of things. But for me, leadership is an outgrowth out of our love for each other, our care and our concern for each other, out of which comes leadership and the value of leadership. So for the next generation to continue to come after me with a hyper focus on loving and leading would be a tremendous legacy for me, I would think.
So let me ask you, I was once in a kindergarten room and I was waiting to talk to the teacher, and these two little girls walked up, and one you could definitely tell was the leader, and the other one was just going to, get the benefits of whatever the first little girl was going to ask for. She was going to, also get the benefits. And the teacher, the kids walked away, and the teacher just kind of looked at me and said, even at this age, you can tell a leader. So what is a leader?
So I truly believe a leader is someone that understands the supreme power of intentional choice and is able to exercise it in such a way where they're able to move themselves and others in a direction of achieving something remarkable.
Okay, so let's follow that thread. When I was a communication and rhetoric undergraduate and graduate student, although to the day my dad died, he said, I don't really understand what rhetoric is, but I was a communication and rhetoric major. But what always interested me from the time I was a little girl, that it seemed like in history, bad guys often were better at communicating than good guys. So when you talk about using it for remarkable gains, sometimes there are leaders that are remarkably good at doing bad things. So how do we distinguish, like, quote, good leaders from bad leaders?
So that's a great question, right?
Or good leaders that are effective doing good things versus bad things.
Right. So for me, that encourages me to think about the notion of motive behind behavior, right? You can be highly skilled at learning certain behaviors that we might see and define as leadership skills or leadership traits, right? But if they're done in a particular way to accomplish a particular end that is viewed as bad, right, which is inherently subjective, but if we view it as bad, then I think there is a propensity to view the person as a bad person, yet with amazing leadership skills, right? Hitler, I mean, we can go through history, right?
Yes.
And so that's why I think for me, the skills in and of themselves are very, very, very important. The manner in which you execute them is very important as well, but the motivation behind it is even more important. And that's why I started with this concept of lovership over leadership. Because if our primary concern is to love one another, then we can lead out of that. And in my opinion, more times than not, the outgrowth of that is going to be something that we hopefully can view as good as opposed to bad.
Now, when you identify or when you assist, people on their leadership journey, what do you see as some qualities that are important to today's leader? When I say today's, and maybe they'd be the same as in the past, maybe not, but what are some qualities that are important in a leader today?
So I think one is care and concern for that which is beyond you, right? Recognizing and understanding that your life is very, very important to you as an individual, but also in service to the larger community. Communication, I think, is probably one of the most important because you can have ideas that advance the world, you can have desires to improve the world, but your ability to communicate that effectively, to galvanize people, to include people, to be able to paint a vision that perhaps a certain segment of the community doesn't see, all of those things surround this notion of communication. I would even venture to say that probably the most important person to be able to communicate effectively to is yourself, right? What are we saying to ourselves? How are we communicating effectively to ourselves? What kind of value do we understand that we have individually? And therefore, then, how can we begin to communicate that from ourselves?
Because what we say
outward?
to ourselves is eventually going to come out.
Absolutely.
In
Absolutely.
Our verbal, vocal, and visual.
Absolutely.
So, as a communication coach, when I study leaders, one thing that I see from what you can see or hear about an Abraham Lincoln, a John F. Kennedy, an FDR, is a calm presence. It is said that when FDR dictated his, infamy speech, that he dictated it as calmly as he was reading the mail. Today, we don't really see that as a quality to be followed, do we? A calmness. We kind of see some examples of kind of bombastic kind of. So, what would you say you see is important as a leader as far as those kind of traits of just the character, the individual?
So I would classify that under this notion of being able to be flexible. We don't communicate in a vacuum, right? We communicate in a context. And so that context oftentimes includes other people, right? And so I think for our ability to understand who it is that we're communicating to, either there in the room, if that's the context, and or those who are watching, because if there's one thing that we've proven through COVID is that we can do a lot of things virtually, right? Social media platforms, all of those kinds of things invite people from all over the world. And so you not only have to understand the context of where you're at, but also the context of who all is also tuning in, who the audience is beyond the audience that you're communicating to that will go out and speak to those, those additional groups. And even I would say, the examples that you used, those speeches and those communications existed at a particular time, but we're decades later, we're still looking back at those and understanding. So to the degree that you can try and understand the context of multiple generations from what it is that you're saying, right? All of those things take me back to this notion of having intentional choice when you communicate. Are you choosing to have a calming presence? Are you choosing to have a presence in which you are stirring up emotion, or you are speaking to someone's intellect versus that which gets them impassioned or excited about something? How you use your voice as a tool, the way in which you use it, not just what you say, the words that you say. I think all of it goes into this amazingly complex notion that communication matters so much, and we can't just leave it up to time and chance. We have to be hyper intentional about what it is that we're choosing to say, how we're choosing to say it, and the manner in which we're doing all of that.
Now, this is probably an oversimplification, but what do people get wrong? I would think that if you ask the average person, can you identify a leader? Whether it was in a Boy Scout troop or a basketball team, a city, a country, people think they can identify leaders. But the one thing that surprised me, I do a program on leadership using horses. And the one constant thing that people say in the beginning of the day is, I'm not a leader. But the horse will tell me differently. So I find that rather than people thinking they're a leader when they're not, that more so people don't think they're a leader when they are. So what do people get most wrong about leadership?
I think part of it is, oftentimes we think the loudest voice that's heard the most frequently is somehow the subject matter expert. Right? Confirmation bias, I think, is a term that plays into that. And so our communities, I think our history has kind of shown us that, right? The loudest voices that are saying the things that subjectively we think need to be said from a leadership position, and that are said the most frequently, and the manner in which they're said, we just kind of take those things and assume that that's what leadership is, right? Instead of, I would say, having a alternate perspective that says, we're all leaders, right? What if that was the premise? We're all leaders. We're all leaders. So now it's not about identifying who a leader is. It's now identifying in which manners do they lead effectively. It's a completely different shift in terms of mentality. And I think as a culture, we err on the other side and make the mistake of not assuming that we're all leaders.
Especially leaders of our own life, our own career,
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So one of, Chris, there's a lot of favorites, but one of my favorite people, Riley Lockridge, was CEO of Comdoc. And he said that, as CEO, I do a lot more following than I do leading. So help us understand. I think it would be foreign to some people to think that a leader ever follows. Yet Riley is saying, I do more following than leading. So where does following and leading fit in leadership?
So I believe leading and following are as important to this dynamic as inhaling and exhaling is to breathing, right? You need to do them both. And if you don't do them both with some semblance of equity, you're going to have respiratory challenges, right? And so following and leading, they just go hand in hand. And Riley is 100% correct. He is a tremendous leader. He actually interviewed me for when I applied for the Leadership Akron signature class about 14 years ago. So and he continues to support us and the transformation that we're making within the community. I remember Joe Camphor also speaking at one of our Leadership on Main speaker events, the first one, as a matter of fact. And I remember him talking about the significance of the ideas that his people had, right? He was making the point that their true value isn't manufacturing Purell, right? Their true value are the ideas that come from their employees. And so he was hyper intentional about making sure he spent time with his employees, because if they had an idea that came from them, he was able to take that idea and sort of follow it, if you will, right? Because following can not only just be I'm following a person, but it can also be I'm following an idea, I'm following a concept, I'm following some notion that helps move us from one place to another. So that's significant. The other thing that I would say too is, whether we like it or not, I think before we recognize the significance of our own power to lead, we are in a following continuum, right? Research says that the average person makes 35,000 conscious decisions every single day. Wow. So that's a little over 12.7 million decisions per year. So in the first year of my birth, my father made 12.7 million conscious decisions. And my mother made 12.7 million conscious decisions. So in the first year of my birth, 25 million decisions were made. And you extrapolate that, by the time I'm 10, that's 250 million decisions. And then you add in their uncles, aunts, cousins, teachers, pastors, mentors, neighbors, friends. By the time you're 10, 20, there are billions of inputs that I think affect what you believe you are, what you think is good and bad, your value systems, your confidence level, all of those kinds of things. And so by the time you get put in a leadership position as a young emerging adult, you're already following the inputs of hundreds of millions of things that largely weren't your own conscious decisions. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to believe that you're actually a leader, because you're actually the byproduct of all of these other inputs that you're following before you choose to exercise intentional choice to become a leader.
Today we are talking with Justin Hilton, president of Leadership Akron. And we've been talking about leadership, and we're going to kind of now twist to talking about Leadership Akron in the context of leadership. So I'm going to ask you some definitions of leadership, and then where Leadership Akron fits into that definition, okay? Leadership has been defined as a set of behaviors used to help people align their collective direction. So what kind of behaviors would you say that Leadership Akron helps emerging leaders learn?
So that's a great question. Leadership Akron, I think it varies depending upon what program you're talking about. So Leadership Akron began 40 years ago with a signature program, which was specifically designed for individuals within the community that were already very, very accomplished leaders, right? And so the intent was to take these leaders and connect them succinctly to the community so they could leverage their leadership skills to advance the community and make it better, right? In the 40-year span that Leadership Akron has existed, we've created this continuum of leadership, we call it, right? Which then spans from high school juniors to college-age students, to young professionals, to seasoned professionals, all the way up to those who are approaching retirement or recently retired. Wow. And so from our youngest to our most seasoned participant, you're spanning 55 years. So the kinds of leadership development and behavioral development that we focus on for a high school junior is different from what we're focusing on for someone who is recently retired that still wants to invest in the community, right? Sure. So it's very different, but I think at its core, it is about the ability, I think, to have vision beyond yourself, which I mentioned before, to have care and concern beyond yourself, to be able to identify where you're passionate and look to align with the community in areas in which the community is wanting to make change or growth or take advantage of new opportunities, be that social service sector, business and enterprise, healthcare, parks and recreation, all of those kinds of things. What am I passionate about, and how can I align what I'm passionate about with some community needs that exist?
Then let me ask you, from a Leadership Akron perspective, there are, quote, 3 essentials to leadership: humility, clarity, and courage. So how does a Leadership Akron assist in, quote, teaching someone about humility or courage?
So one of the things that we do is we tap our alumni and some of the subject matter experts within our community to come in and actually do that kind of teaching, actually deliver that kind of content, right? We don't provide, as an organization, we're not the creators of content. Instead, we identify those creators and we bring them in, and they willingly give us their time, talent, and expertise to be able to develop those kinds of skills, or at least to inform and create an awareness of the significance of why those skills are necessary to advance our community.
So let me ask you, as an executive coach, I see that leaders have the ability to think strategically, and other people have the ability to implement tactically. But because you talk about vision, is that something that can be taught, or are you just kind of strategic or not, and you're kind of stuck with what you are?
I typically lean into both and, right? and what you feed typically grows, right? So there are beliefs out there that says, hey, I have strengths and I have weaknesses. Some believe that I can work on my weaknesses and make them stronger. Some believe, hey, work on your strengths because they're your strengths, just keep growing stronger in that regard, and augment your weaknesses with other people on your team, et cetera. What's the specific, equation? I don't know. I just believe that everybody has the potential within them for both and. Sometimes it's an aspect of what opportunities they've had, right? Yeah. To be able to uncover that is a gift or a skill that they have.
So let me ask you, before I get to the lightning round, is leadership something that you do or something that you are? Because if we say leadership is something you do, not something you are, but then we call people leaders. So is leadership something that you are or you do?
So again, I think it's both, right? Because I think we do based on what we are, and we become based on what we do, right? So our behaviors over time create habits, and our habits ultimately determine the places in which we find ourselves, the kinds of information that we allow to come in, the type of people that we associate with. Our habits typically determine all that, and then that determines who we continue to become, right? So
yes.
I think it is
you are right. Yes,
I think it's a both and.
It's a continuum like everything.
Correct.
I'm going to ask you for short answers, okay, in the lightning round. You have the opportunity and the honor to be around very accomplished people at one end, sure. Of people that have been in the community and have been identified as leaders. What would surprise us overall about accomplished community or corporate leaders? What is something that would surprise us?
Probably that they didn't think they were at some point.
Okay. What surprised you when you found yourself in an environment where, whether it was at Kent State or whether it was at Goodyear, whenever, and you were meeting people that perhaps, were a peer or above you on an organizational chart? Did anything surprise you about meeting these, quote, leaders?
Yes. What surprised me is that they were as down to earth as anybody else. And they weren't up at this level or stature that we placed them. They were still human beings that were just like me.
Put pants on one leg at a time,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
What inspires you?
What inspires me, I think, the most is the potential of humanity to have care and concern and love for each other.
So what do you like to read? Is there something that you're reading now, something that you're listening to on a podcast, or what kind of things give you feed your intellect?
So the Bible is what I focus on. So I read that every single day because depending upon, really no matter what your perspective is, if you dive into that thing, I think there are leadership principles for days in that book.
True.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
True. I'm going to ask you for one title of all the interview shows on TV, on cable, podcasts, whatever. Whose show would you like to be a guest on?
Wow, that is a great question. I feel like this one is at the top of the charts. Oprah Winfrey.
Okay. In one word, what gives you hope? When you think of your daughter, what gives you hope?
That I believe she was created uniquely in such a way that she's a gift to this world and that she will become that over time.
I had the privilege to see and hear General Colin Powell. One thing he said about leadership is that great leaders are almost always simplifiers who can cut through argument, debate, and doubt to offer a solution. Our guest today, Justin Hilton, has helped us cut through pop culture and perhaps preconceived ideas to understand leadership and leadership in our community. I'm Leslie Unger. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360 today.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.